Um, I don't have any agenda updates, and I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Butita.
Here.
Mrs. Crosby.
Here.
Mr. Fellers. Mr. Fellers. Absent. Mr. Fiducia. Mr. Fiducia.
Here.
I think you're here.
I'm here.
Thank you, Mr. Girl.
Here.
Mrs. Gorel. Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly. Mr. McDonald.
Here.
Mr. Neighbors.
Here.
Mrs. Red.
Here.
Mr. Salgado.
Present.
Mr. Schultz. Mr. Schultz. Mr. Tassoni.
Present.
Mr. Webster.
Here.
Mr. Westcott. Mr. Westcott. Mr. Arena.
Here.
Mr. Billich.
Here.
Mr. Booker. Mr. Booker. Mr. Chairman, we have 7 absent and 11 present. I'm sorry, that's 12 present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do not have any public comment. I'm going to move up one thing. I'm just going to mention under chairman report. Hold on here. Bear with me. There's been a bunch of news today that you really do need to be aware of related to the stay-at-home order. Let me hit this really quick here. All right, so today the governor announced a couple things that where they announced that they would be potentially handing out Class A misdemeanors. That was walked back today for those not complying with the stay-at-home order. They talked about restaurants and bars being able to be open outside. That was a new thing today that came from the governor. They also talked about expanding the ability for, I think, boating to have more people, foursomes with golf, and a lot more activity around outdoor activities. They also, let me see, those were the main ones for today, but there were definitely some additional changes in the stay-at-home order. So I would suggest you take a look at that. With that, I do know we have a number of, we got a couple of appointments tonight.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Just a quick question in relation, and I know it's happened quickly. From what we've been seeing in the media, restaurants are going to be allowed to begin opening at 25% capacity. Do you have any idea if it's if we're going to stick to the 25% capacity in addition to the outdoor seating?
That is not, so basically what has happened today is the governor came in over the top and said no indoor restaurant use, that the outdoor restaurant use could be utilized. What the Illinois Restaurant Association is begging and recommending is that 25% of indoor capacity be allowed to be used. There was a study that came out today also by the Illinois Restaurant Association that said that 20% of all restaurants in the state of Illinois, there's 5,200 restaurants in our state, 20% of them will likely not survive a couple of months of the current trajectory. There is no science that I have seen or that any scientist or public health person has shared that says why we cannot figure out how to have a few people getting together inside of a restaurant, given all the public progress on health metrics. There's nothing that makes sense. There's no science that has been shared. I'm very disappointed that that could not be attacked or looked at in what the governor shared today. Mr. McDonald, on a follow-up.
Yes, thank you, sir. I believe it was last Thursday's update in which Mayor McNamara and Dr. Martell seemed to show support for restaurants opening at partial capacity. Are we still looking at being able to do that plan in addition to the governor's plan?
So right now, the governor's order ends on May 30th or 29th, 30th. There's no order in place going forward. If the General Assembly takes action this week, and it's likely they will, then it becomes state law ratified by their General Assembly. That becomes a much tougher thing. That becomes a much tougher thing to overcome with local preference if the General Assembly takes action, from my perspective. And I believe lawyers would say absolutely state law trumps local anything. There is ongoing litigation around questioning the governor's authority, as you know, related to his ability to continue to, on a one-off basis, singularly extend his own order time and time again. That is a different issue. And that's what's being challenged is it constitutional for one person to do it? It is a much different thing if the General Assembly takes action. That does handcuff us. We didn't know what would occur, but we were planning around local action and having industry experts and restaurant owners working with public health people to find a sensible way to do a percentage of capacity with other restrictions. Those are the conversations that are ongoing. What happened today, if it's ratified by the General Assembly, becomes much more difficult. To answer your question, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Kelly. Oh, can't hear you, Dave. Unmute yourself, Dave Kelly.
I didn't press the right button.
Yeah, go ahead.
I applaud the effort that produced these working groups. That's a very intelligent approach to the challenge of reopening across various industries and segments of our society.
A lot of work went on there. I did forward to the board the updated list today. I received it last night and I forwarded it to you all today. So just so you know, that was added to for the restaurants, the churches, and the daycare discussion. The daycare discussion is very problematic because there's some, that is a very intricate with the state in terms of daycare's opening. So that one may be a bit delayed. There was a discussion, full transparency, with several pastors of multiple faiths, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, about thoughtful ways to reopen. We cannot, I'm Catholic, guys. The Catholic Church cut a deal with the state. We cannot have the Catholic Church able to have some level of service and no other faith community able to have some level of service. That no matter what your faith is, or if you have no faith at all, that's not equity. And so that has to be reconciled locally, and if not, then by the General Assembly through action. I don't care who takes it, but I don't think any of us are in a big hurry to have an equity at that level where one faith community can do something that another cannot. Any other questions? I didn't mean to throw that in there, but that came out later in the day with what some of the governor said in his press conference, and there's a lot going on in Springfield. Any other questions just on that? Okay, then moving on, I see Mrs. Red has her hand up. Mrs. Red, go ahead. I can't hear you, Mrs. Red. You got to unmute your. There you go.
Thank you, Chairman.
Go
My
ahead.
question, when will the private campgrounds open?
Great point. Today, there was some news on campgrounds. I apologize for not mentioning that. Outdoor activities. There was some mention of campgrounds, I believe, today. Oh, with the new 10-person gathering limit for all activities in phase 3, boating or camping with up to 10 people will be permitted. So Mrs. Red, you've been asking about camping. It can occur up to 10 people. Those 10 people do not have to be within the same house, is what a lawyer mentioned this afternoon. So no more than 10 people in doing camping.
So that's opening when?
Phase 3, I believe, begins the 29th or 30th of May. So like next Thursday or Friday. Don't quote me on which day. It's one of the two.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And if somebody knows which day it is, you can jump in. I believe it's the 29th. And I apologize. I'm 90% sure it's the 29th. If not, it is the 30th. And I know you've had that question on camping. So that came out today. I didn't know that one was coming.
Thank you.
This is State Attorney Hyde Ross. This is the
Go
29th.
ahead, Marilyn.
It is the 29th, Chairman. You're correct.
Is there anything you wanted to add about any news today? I know everyone's kind of getting it digested. Is there anything you want to share with the group?
Well, you had mentioned the religious issues, and I would share that on May 16th, the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit denied a temporary restraining order. There was a challenge to the governor's executive order regarding religious organizations and their worship, and they denied a temporary restraining order. The cases are set. Appellant's brief are due May 22nd. Appellee's brief is due June 1st, and reply brief due June 5. So that is currently pending in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals.
Thank you. And there's a legal avenue that Marilyn can provide us info with. I guess I step back and I don't mean to belabor it, but I don't know how we in our community have a discussion that doesn't involve at least equity around religious worship. That doesn't make any sense to me. And that's outside of the legal discussion. I'm not disagreeing with what Marilyn just said, but it just doesn't make any sense that can't be worked out. The governor did mention that they are working on something. I don't know what that something is. I'm hopeful that that's not just a legal fight going forward. I see Mr. Arena's hand up. Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I looked at those working groups, they seem to have a significant representation from the Rockford City Council, but less representation from this board and from the other governing bodies throughout the county. I'm wondering two questions. Why is that? And then my second question is, these policy decisions that are being made regarding this, are they being made in an open meeting where there's minutes that we could review to understand better why these groups have been formed the way they are?
No, the group started one way and shifted another. And I think I mentioned that in an email, is that initially the city of Rockford was creating some working groups on long-term planning and such, rather than duplicate efforts. So for example, if you're talking healthcare, all 3 hospitals are in the city of Rockford. I don't know where they live. Some of the folks on that group live throughout the county, but all 3 hospitals are obviously located in the city limits of Rockford. So, you know, when you have a healthcare discussion, it's going to be Rockford centric. If you look at it one way, it's going to be regional. If you look at it another way, rather than duplicating efforts, there's been time and energy around expanding on some initial groups rather than running off into the corner. There was a, pretty good alignment and agreement between the area mayors who are meeting 3 times a week on doing that. I have not heard any concerns around that. There seems to be agreement on the idea of something around restaurants, something around churches, and something around childcare. I think everybody's digesting the news of the day. But yes, I would say that began very heavy with one of our largest municipality and has been added to significantly over the course of the last couple of weeks. But we also have people who live outside of Rockford, but work in Rockford. We have people who work in Rockford, live and vice versa.
Excuse me, Joe, just so that we can.
Depending on how you look at it, I guess it's one thing or more than another.
Right, just in the interest of time to answer my question, you have a significant representation from the city council of Rockford and less from this board and from the other municipalities' boards. And I'm wondering, shouldn't there have been a more diverse group in terms of the, elected people who are involved? And then my second question is, were these decisions, are they being made in an open meeting where we can see minutes and view how these conversations took place?
Yeah, so the decision to advocate for restaurants and childcare in churches, that came off of our mayor's call. That is a Zoom meeting. That is not based on Open Meetings Act. Like when we meet, we got to post a meeting. And so no, those are not open public meetings at this point. What we share very publicly is rationale around that. But yeah, those are not like this, where we have an elected body where we post meetings and have Open Meetings Act requirements to fulfill in order to meet. Did I answer? What's your second question again?
Well, the second question is, why weren't, an equivalent number of members of this body and say the city council for Loves Park or McChesney Park also included in these working groups? It looks like all the groups have members of the Rockford City Council, but not the other, municipalities.
You have to ask Mayor Jury that question about Loves Park City Council. I do not know. What I did say very bluntly and repeatedly is that there needs to be countywide representation. And I think when you look at that list on a number of ways, not just county government, whether it's Steve Chapman, Jazz Billick, I believe Gene's on a group. There are folks from around our county in business as well as in other sectors. But it's a fair point. Could there be more? I guess so, but I couldn't speak for Mayor Jury. I do know he is in a very active part of discussions that are occurring, as is Mayor Rail, as is Mayor Zula, and Mayor Johnson from Loves Park, and Mayor Eubank from the Village of Winnebago have been pretty routinely engaged on direct conversations. The attorney for Cherry Valley and Rockton is sitting in on behalf of their particular mayors. It's a fair question. I saw Mrs. Crosby's hand up. Mrs. Crosby.
All I can add, Paul, is that this is coming from the mayor's office. It's a program called Rebounding Rockford. He handpicked these individuals himself. They're just his call. And I didn't ask for it, but he chose me. And so I'm happy to serve, but it's coming through the city and it's not a function of any other jurisdiction. And the chairman's correct. It's not subject to the Open Meetings Act requirements. So it is what it is. Now we're happy to keep you posted and in the loop and all that other kind of stuff. But it was really Mayor McLemara's call.
Chairman Haney.
Go ahead, Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you. I was going to bring the same subject up under new business because I have to agree with Paul. I was glad that he had asked this question, that we were able to have you send us the rebounding working groups. We have to remember that we are a county that is very diverse. We have an unincorporated county, we have villages, and we have towns. And they don't sometimes fall under the same guidelines or needs that a city the size of Rockford has. That's one of the things I was going to propose tonight, that we take the Policy and Personnel Committee and take a look at why we can't form some type of a committee for the rest of our county. Yes, I know you say that they're kind of included in here, but we have parts of our county have different needs than other parts. And that way we can take a look at the whole county instead of just a segment of our county and the needs that they have and how we're going to rebound. Even their rebounding is going to be probably a little different than ours because their numbers aren't going to be high like our local numbers are in Rockford. So I'm going to ask Dave Fiducia to put on our agenda for next Thursday, I think it's Thursday night, that we will be having a meeting that we discuss this and see if there's anything we can do for our unincorporated areas and our small villages and towns. And we need some input of what kind of help they're going to need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. By next Thursday,
Hello?
we're going to be, at the cusp of everything being decided for the most part at the transition between 2 and 3. The General Assembly is meeting right now in Springfield. Conversations are taking place that could come down that would be, I guess, passed down to us. This is a big week, early next week with the holiday. A lot will be decided by next Wednesday. You guys can certainly have any discussions. I would just say there's a very condensed time in which discussions would occur, but do what you need to do. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're having a meeting, I believe, tomorrow night or Thursday night, and Mrs. Gorel could certainly bring that up at our meeting under other business. I'm sure that all the members would be happy to entertain that under other business. So, Mrs.
Are
Gorel,
you saying I'm a week off?
What's that?
I'm a week off, my thinking.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry. I thought it was Thursday today, so don't worry about it.
Hello?
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Webster, is that you?
Yes, thank you. Hey, just a couple of thoughts. One is when Paul asked you the question about the meetings, are there minutes to the meetings and so forth, and you said, no, they're not a public meeting, and then that kind of flies in the face with this notion that we're all in this together, as far as I'm concerned, and I think that it would behoove them to do the Zoom so at least anybody could listen in to what they're discussing. And then secondly, as far as you're correct, our hospitals are in the city of Rockford. That's correct. But don't forget, we have clinics in other areas as well. Monroe Clinic has a walk-in clinic in Durand. And so there's other walk-in clinics all around our county is actually. So to forget any of them as part of this conversation is, I don't know. That's not right either. That's all I got right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Any other quick questions on this topic? Okay, moving along. We have 2 items this evening under unfinished business: the appointment of Mike Shablasky to the Chicago Rockford International Airport, the appointment of Brad Lindmark to Winnebago County District 4. Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to let you know, Joe Hoffman's trying to get on. He had a little computer glitch, and I think the help desk is helping him right now. So he should be on momentarily.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Hi, Mrs. Gorel, go ahead.
since we're waiting for Joe to jump aboard, I'm going to skip one and go to the board member correspondence. That's some good news you might like to hear, but I think you already did hear it from River Bluff. Last Saturday, River Bluff had a surprise guest several of them that walked in Saturday morning to do an inspection. They are called the Public Health Surveillance Team, and they went through, they checked everyone, they checked everything. And when Pat McDermott called me, she's the administrator, she was so excited. I hadn't heard her that excited for a long time, because we got thumbs up on everything. They were so complimentary on how well we have kept that business going in the climate that we have right now. And she was so proud of all her employees and all her residents, because everyone keeps getting tested and keeps getting tested and keeps getting tested. And so they've been able to keep a controlled atmosphere there. So she was just tickled that the Public Health Surveillance Team gave them really good marks. And I thought all of our county board members should know that. Thank you.
Very good news, and they've done a wonderful job out there, especially the last couple of months. So with that, we have two items of business here this evening, and with I'll go to Mrs. Crosby on the. I'd entertain a motion to appoint Mike Shablaski to the Chicago Rockford International Airport.
And I'll move that motion, Chairman.
We got a motion by Mrs. Crosby, and I have a second by Mr. Girl. Item is now before the board for discussion.
Point of order, or I don't know if this is, I see.
You have a point of order, Mr. Arena?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's point of order is correct, but Mr. Booker was on here and he was trying to ask a question for, and now I see he's disappeared. And Mr. Tasmani said Mr. Hoffman was trying to get on. Should we wait for our other board members who want to participate to get on before we move forward?
Well, we're in the middle of discussion at this point. So yeah, we can absolutely have discussion while we're waiting for them to get on. I have no problem if they would like to call in, but yes, Mrs. Crosby.
Oh, I don't have, I didn't have my hand up, but I am in favor of the appointment based on his resume. And I have talked to city leaders around the community, and that's in minority communities as well as majority. And I have had zero resistance regarding the appointment of Mike Shablaski. Had I would let you know. And that is the end of my comments right now.
Okay, thank you. I saw Mr. Tassoni's hand up. I would just say this, since I'm bringing forward the appointment. Mike Shablaski worked at Woodward. He worked and handled all of their financial external relationships in his final several years at Woodward. What does that mean? Working with government partners, private sector partners, working with audit. So when they had acquisitions, complex acquisitions, he was the point in many of those discussions. We lost Mr. Deary to the airport. What does the airport do? They have a number of very large, complicated, strategic and financial acquisitions and projects. So we lost a skill set. We are replacing that skill set with somebody with equal or better financial and strategic executive leadership, and somebody, I might add, that has been hyper involved in the community, not politically, but in the community. And so when you look at the number of people in our region that have been involved in deals of a certain level of complexity, he is on a very short list of folks who have been involved in a direct way with these type of things. Are there any, I can't see because of the glare here.
Mr. Tassoni, call on Mr. Tassoni.
Oh, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And like I say, regardless of whoever is either for or against any of these appointments coming forward tonight, I just remember there being some concern at our last meeting when these same topics were up, that I don't know who it was, I can't recall, but there was concern that one member was not present because either he fell off of Zoom or had trouble connecting or whatever it was, and they asked that we not vote because one member, and I think we have Mr. Westcott not available and Mr. Hoffman having some technical difficulties, and I just wouldn't want to short somebody to either to voice their yay or nay vote.
I appreciate that
items.
opinion. I see Mr. Booker has joined the meeting. I do know that Mr. Westcott will not be joining the meeting. He sent me a text. So I don't know what I do not want to do as a general rule is to say, well, somebody is missing, so we can't do any business, because 95% of the time somebody is in fact missing. Gus, are you on the line, or Dan Majors? Do we have a resolution here to Mr. Hoffman?
I've sent him the, this is Gus, I've sent him the links to connect into the Zoom session, as well as texting him. I texted him a link to call in.
Yeah, Joe, it's Frank. Okay. It says, please wait for the host to start this meeting. So why don't you stay on the line with us to participate in the discussion until we get you on, and continue to work on getting on the Zoom, but participate in this discussion because does that work for you, Joe? Okay. Okay, so Mr. Hoffman is live on the line with me, and he is attempting to, I don't want to cut anybody out that's trying to get in, but I do not believe that Mr. Westcott is able to join us this evening. With that, I see Mrs. Red's hand up. Mrs. Red.
Mr. Chairman, as I stated at our last meeting, and I've sent this text message out to most of the county board members, I would like for this position to remain open until the new chairman is seated. Because of the nasty things that Mike Don said to me, I don't think that I have nothing against Mike Sablaski. In fact, we've talked about that. But the memo that I sent out, or the letter that I sent out to you, was given to Mr. Dunn, and either you or someone else on the county board gave it to him, and he decided to send me a very, very nasty text message. So I am going to make the motion that this seat remains open until the new chairman is seated in December.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. We have a motion on the floor. Can we do that?
A motion could be made on top of an item that has already been motioned on the floor. What I question is, I question if somebody can lay something over that is up for an up or down vote. I question the legitimacy and the ability of a board member to make such a motion. The date I'm reading is May 20th, 2020. I guess I would look to legal, because I don't understand how on May 20th of 2020, that something that is in the purview of the chairman and is related to the #1 economic driver in our region, when they have a financial opening, that we are going to sit idle and twiddle our thumbs for upwards of 6 months, when we have the once in 100-year financial crisis in the middle of a once in 100-year public health crisis. I do not know all of the deals that are going on with the airport in terms of growth and jobs. I do know that our economy is getting pulverized right now. I don't understand, if a board member has the authority to do that. I will, though, in fairness to your request, Mrs. Red, before I speak my thoughts on the gesture, I would ask if that's even something that we have to consider. I would go to either Attorney Kurlinkus or to Marilyn.
Brace yourself.
Point of order, I didn't even hear a second.
Hello? Hello?
We didn't have a second.
Hello?
My question,
Hello?
Mr. Webster,
Hello?
you have the floor.
Hello, Jim.
Hello? I'll give Dorothy her second.
We have a motion and a second, and now the question is that a legitimate motion that has been made? And I'm asking the attorney to explain how basically taking away a right to an appointment when it clearly exists in the ordinance in chapter 2, I believe, of the ordinance? How is that a legal action? Mr. Kurlinkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to turn this other. Chairman, because it requires a vote, anything that requires a vote can be laid over. They're not laying over your nomination. But the vote and how that's taken, that is in the purview of the board. They have to have
Mr. Kurlinkus, I cannot hear you. Marilyn, could you jump in on his behalf? I cannot hear Mr. Kurlinkus.
Can you hear me?
Oh, you're back.
Yeah. I'm just saying, what we've got here is a situation where they're not challenging the nomination, which is yours, but they have to vote on it. And the vote, the advice and consent on this can be laid over, just like any other vote, any other motion vote can be laid over in any way, shape, or form. So I would believe it would be.
So you're saying that
properly motion second to lay it over, they could do that.
Mr. Kurlinkus, you're saying that Mrs. Red is within her authority to make a motion to lay over an appointment of an open seat, even though I, as chairman, get to make the appointment subject board approval, that no vote would occur in the remaining 6 months of my time as chairman. You're saying that she could make a motion.
No, excuse me,
That's
Chairman.
what that was the motion, is that she.
Well, I didn't hear the motion, Chairman, and as I said, I apologize. I'm trying to run a school board meeting because this meeting was called on a school board night. So I'm having a difficult time. But if the idea is that she doesn't want to vote on it for the next 6 months, that's a different situation. Again, I'm sorry, I missed that portion of it. What they can do is lay over the vote at this meeting, I believe, to a time certain. I'm not sure that they can. I'm not sure that it would be proper to lay it over for the remainder of your term as chairman. But I'm saying they could not vote on it tonight.
Understood. So what I'm going to rule Mrs. Red as the person running the meeting is that was a motion you do not have the right to make. If somebody would like to challenge that, the board can override it with a majority vote. So somebody could make a motion to say, I would like to overrule the chairman's action, but I am deeming as the person running the meeting that was an illegal action, and thus we cannot do that at this time. I will, however, allow the board, if somebody would like to make a motion to overrule the chairman and a majority of the board would like to do that, then ultimately you are able then to do that. That is how the rules work. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of what you just conveyed to us, maybe it would be a better idea to just lay this over till our next regularly scheduled board meeting. I'd make a motion for that.
So we have a motion by Mr. Fiducia and that would be on top of the motion to approve, on top of the motion to lay over for 6 months, a motion by Mr. Fiducia to lay it over to the next scheduled board, to the next board meeting. I would
second that, Mr. Chairman, to the next regularly scheduled county board meeting. The regularly scheduled county board meeting that we all approved and voted on for our yearly board meetings.
So there's a motion by Mr. Fiducia to lay this over to the next board meeting and a second by Mr. Webster. So the layover is now before the board for discussion. I'll share my 2 cents is that I don't know what changed between last Thursday and tonight. I don't know what would change between tonight and next week, except that when I'm reading about our economic situation in our community, it is pretty stressed. The #1 economic driver in our region is our airport. They lost a key person. I've yet to heard one board member, one community member, or anybody say that they have a question, a concern about this gentleman's qualifications. So yes, I did, when I received a letter from Mrs. Red that was filled with inaccurate statements, I did what anybody would do, is I fact checked it to make sure that when I corresponded with Mrs. Red, it was accurate. And getting information from the airport regarding historical appointments was very important to addressing the letter I received at 4 o'clock on the day of the board meeting. I reached out to my friend, Mrs. Red, who I've worked with on many appointments very well and collaboratively. And I think together we've done good work. The work done by this board around appointments has been, I think, very good over the last 3 years. I reached out to Mrs. Red upwards of 3 weeks ago. I received a follow-up from her at 4 o'clock in writing with information that was incorrect, partially incorrect. And so I attempted earnestly to rectify that situation. My words are my words. Mrs. Red's words are Mrs. Red's words. Mr. Dunn's words are Mr. Dunn's words. I did not endorse. I do not champion anything anybody else is saying, but I do believe what I'm sharing with this board is we have an exceptional candidate for you guys to enthusiastically endorse. And the only thing that would get in the way of that is things other than the qualifications of a really quality, talented executive who could help make that place better. Any other comments on the motion to lay over? I see none. We do need government now, folks. Not, we need action. We need government now, not later. Any other comments by board members?
Mr. Chairman, my hand has been up.
Oh, hi, Mr. Arena, go ahead.
Thank you. So you had asked what would change between now and next Thursday. I think the issue here is not Mr. Shablaski's qualifications or your right to make the appointment. What's relevant is that Mr. Dunn's contact with Mrs. Red was inappropriate. And I know that Personnel and Policy intends to discuss what took place here. I know that during our joint caucus, Ms. Crosby had said that, you know, Mike Shablaski is Mr. Dunn's choice for this position. I think there's issues related to the propriety of he, as the executive director of the board, being able to select his own board, that at least is worthy of a conversation. So for this to lay over for just, 8 days, so that we can have a conversation in a public forum on everything that transpired, I think is fully, completely appropriate. And so for that reason, I support laying it over until our next regular board meeting. Thank you.
Just to follow up so I understand, do you believe that Mr. Shablaski will be more qualified or in any way less qualified with his credentials and experience and what he brings to the table in 8 days?
No, I don't think Mr. Shablaski's qualifications would change at all, but I can guarantee you in a county of this size, Mr. Shablaski is not the only individual who's qualified. And my question would be, why would Mr. Dunn act in such an inappropriate way over this when Mrs. Red's inquiry about the diversity on the board was wholly appropriate, completely part of her job as a board member to do that. And, I would want to have a better understanding of why that's okay. I don't think that any public official should communicate with any member of this board in the way that Mike Dunn did towards Miss Red.
Mrs. Crosby.
Well, if we want to be really transparent, I was one of those board members that did not receive a copy of the text. I don't know if everyone got it but Jean, but I feel slightly discriminated against because I have not received a copy of Dorothy Red's text. I have no idea what was said. And in order for that to be fair, I would think that Miss Red would want everybody to have a copy of it. So I know what I'm looking at because I haven't seen this text. The other thing is, guys, nobody can control Mike Dunn's mouth. Nobody. I've known the man 30 years. He's notorious for doing things off the cuff. That's just who he is. And I don't know why we have to defend what he does or anybody else. the debate is between him and Dorothy, but it's not my job to be responsible for what Mike Dunn says. That's how I feel. Enough.
So the letter I received asked the board to lay over this until there was a new chairman. That request came from Mrs. Red before there was a response by anybody at the airport. And to be clear, those are not my words. The idea that we would not do business was being asserted in a letter I received at 4 o'clock after respectfully reaching out to a partner 2 weeks prior.
Hello?
And
Hello?
I would say,
Hello?
yeah, hold on 1 second, please.
No, call the question.
Mr. Webster, hold on, please.
Call the question.
So what I would say, Mr. Arena, is that we have gone through a process, and yes, Mrs. Crosby mentioned that Mr. Dunn was supportive. It is my recommendation. It did come from me, and I've been looking at this position for quite some time. There was an unexpected opening, and
I've asked to call the question.
thank you, Mr. Webster. We got a motion by Mr. Webster to end debate about debate of Mike Shablaski's appointment to the airport board. May I have a second to ending debate about this action item?
Second, Dorothy Red, make the second.
Mrs. Red on the second. So there's a motion by Mr.
Point
Red,
of order.
record, and a second by Mr. Webster on the motion, and a
One second. Point of order.
on the on calling the question. There is a call to.
There's a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr.
Point of order. Is he calling the question on actually laying this over? Because I think that's what he's calling the question. The discussion on is whether or not to lay this over till next Thursday. So calling the question to end debate on to a point is wrong. It's calling the question on ending discussion on the layover.
Got it. There's a motion and a second to call the question on whether or not to lay this item over. Thank you, Mr. Girl, for clarifying that.
Another point of order, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Webster did not have the floor when he made his point, when he made his motion.
He called a point of order. I'll give it to him on that, but I would ask that you make sure you have the floor before you engage. I know some cannot see things as easily as others, so we'll give some latitude on that, and I appreciate you pointing that out. So we have a motion and a second. The motion is to end discussion on whether or not to lay it over. There's been a second on ending discussion by Mrs. Red. So with that, a yes vote ends discussion, and I will ask the clerk to please call the roll. A yes vote ends discussion. A no vote will allow discussion to continue about whether or not to lay it over. Clerk,
Thank you,
I ask you to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Crosby,
Yes.
Mr. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia, Mr. Fiducia,
A yes is to lay it over, correct?
To call the question.
Correct.
To call
Call
the
the question. Okay.
discussion.
yes, Mr. Fiducia, Mr. Girl,
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman is still absent.
No, I'm here.
Oh, hello, Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors,
Yes.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster.
Yes.
I'm double checking. Mr. Westcott is still absent. Thank you. Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Butita,
Yes.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. That ends the discussion.
Thank you. Motion passed. We've ended, we've called the question. No more discussion on this item. Now the vote is on. A yes vote would lay it over to next Thursday. A no vote leaves it right here for more discussion. So with that, I will ask the clerk to call the roll. A yes vote does lay it over, a no vote keeps it here. Clerk Gama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mrs. Crosby,
No.
Mr. Fellers,
No.
Mr. Fiducia,
Yes.
Mr. Girl,
No.
Mrs. Gorel,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman,
No.
Mr. Kelly,
No.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Neighbors,
No.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni,
Yes.
Mr. Webster.
Yes.
Mr. Westcott is still absent. Mr. Arena,
Yes.
Mr. Billich,
No.
Mr. Booker,
No.
Mr. Butita,
No.
Mr. Chairman, we have a tied vote.
No, you don't.
I'm going to vote no on the layover. So then we would, yes, sir. I will vote no. Mr. McDonald.
Aren't we only missing Mr. Westcott? There should be 19.
Mr. Westcott is at OSF with his father.
That's my question. Who else is missing? Who else?
Boomer.
Mr. Boomer. District 4 seat that we need to fill tonight. So the motion fails to lay it over, so it stays here this evening for approval. And the item before the board now is the Mike Shablasky appointment to the airport board. That is before the board. Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I'm gonna throw a monkey wrench in this. I'm gonna change my vote from no to yes.
We already took the vote, but how do we handle that procedurally?
Or our legal people.
I'm here. If you can, I mean, you can allow him to change his vote, or you can go through the process of revoting again, but I'm assuming that the votes will come out. It will not be a tie. So one way or another, whatever you prefer to do. But if, like I said, if you want to recall the vote, you certainly can do that.
No, we don't want to waste time. We want to get some things done. So with Mr. Hoffman changing his vote from no to yes, there is no need for me to break the vote. And then the item, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I understood it right, once the clerk calls the vote, that's it, isn't it? And I'm just asking for future reference. I thought once the vote's been called, it was done. You couldn't go back later and change it.
I'd ask,
Chairman, if I could, as a practical point on this thing, I suppose you could go through and do a motion to reconsider. And since I think it's going to come out the same anyway. So I think, you know, from a practical matter, I think you probably decided it correctly.
Mr. McDonald, would anybody that is a yes want to change their vote to no, since we allowed it from a no to a yes?
Or maybe a maybe.
So we will allow Mr. Hoffman, to avoid a procedural game, we will mark his no and make it a yes, which would change the vote outcome. Then this item then would lay over until next Thursday at the will of the board. And that is, and again, I will give a last option since we're allowing respectfully for Mr. Hoffman to change his vote. If anybody on the yes side would like to change their vote to no, then we could take action this evening. Want to offer that to any of the yes votes? I see none, so we will make that an official vote. Clerk Gumow, and we will lay this over until next Thursday.
I'm sorry for that, Chairman, for that confusion.
There's no confusion. It's crystal clear. Our next item of business is the approval of Brad Lindmark to the District 4 board, District 4 County Board seat. May I please have a motion? Mr. Hoffman, Mr. McDonald on the motion, and Mrs. Crosby on the second. Brad Lindmark has been motioned and seconded and is now before the board. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I began my comments before the item was removed at our last meeting, so you're aware that the precinct committeemen for District 4 unanimously recommended Mike Zintak, and the Central Committee for the Republicans affirmed that. You also have in the surrounding, all of the contiguous board members, unless they've changed their vote tonight, are all voting against Mr. Lindmark, not because we have opposition to him, but because we don't believe that he's the recommendation that should be brought forward. And with that, I'll end my comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Kelly.
I'm at the opposite end of the county, but that's the way we've done it through all my previous service on the board. So I'm gonna oppose Mr. Lindmark's appointment.
Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's the way we've always done it. It's been very dangerous words in many other occupations and ways of doing things. There was a vote of the Republican caucus. Mr. Lindmark did receive a majority of those votes from the Republican caucus. Granted, it was very close, but Mr. Lindmark did receive a majority of those votes. I would ask my fellow Democratic board members to support your Republican board members in voting yes for Mr. Lindmark. Thank you.
Mrs. Crosby.
I just want to add that I realize that this is how it's been done in the past. This is how Angie got on. This is how Keith McDonald got on, but it's a different era today. The Republican Party is in the caucus is divided, plain and simple. And there will never be a unanimous vote one way or the other. And I was under the understanding from Mr. Tassoni, Angie Gorel, Mr. Huffman, that the majority vote would prevail. And now I'm being told you have to have a unanimous vote for it to prevail, which you should have disclosed much earlier on. Not that it would have made any difference. Mr. McDonald is right. The vote was taken and you need to support the majority vote. You may disagree with it, but it still was the majority vote. So that is my position. And I believe it's a fair position and a correct position. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Is that Mr. Webster? Is that you?
Yes, that's me again. And I'm going to make another motion to call the question, please.
You're going to make a motion to call the question in debate on a District 4 appointment. Okay, put that in the record there, Clerk Gumow. We have a second to discussion again.
The reason I said that, Mr. Chairman, there is because
hold on.
This appointment has been out there for a while now, and I think everyone has their mind made up, I think.
Mr. Webster, you do not have the floor. We have a motion by you to call the question. Mr. Fiducia has made the second. I'll go right back to you, though. Now that we have a second, I'll go ahead and give you the floor, sir.
the reason I made that motion, I'm sorry, but the reason I made that motion is because this appointment, this has been out there now for a while, and I think everybody knows where their head is at on this, and so that's why I called it into debate. Thank you.
Any other comments about, before we vote to call the question? Actually, we do not have discussion about calling the question, do we? Normally we just do the vote on that. So with that, I will ask the clerk to call the roll. A yes vote ends discussion on the District 4 appointment, and then we would, in a separate action, vote with no more discussion. So yes vote ends discussion. Yes vote allows discussion to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fellers.
No.
Mr. Fiducia.
Yes.
Mr. Girl.
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel.
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors.
Yes.
Mrs. Red.
Yes.
Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Tassoni.
Yes.
Mr. Webster.
Yes.
Mr. Arena.
Yes.
Mr. Billich.
Mike's down.
Mr. Billich.
Sorry, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Butita.
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby.
Yes.
We only have one no, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, with that, the item before the board is to approve Brad Lindmark to the District 4 seat. And a yes vote approves and a no vote disapproves of the vote. And I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fiducia.
No.
Mr. Girl.
Yes.
Mrs. Gorel.
No.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
No.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors.
No.
Mrs. Red.
No.
Mr. Salgado.
No.
Mr. Schultz.
No.
Mr. Tassoni.
No.
Mr. Webster.
No.
Mr. Arena.
No.
Mr. Billich. Mr. Billich.
Yes.
Mr. Booker.
Yes.
Mr. Butita.
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby.
Yes.
Mr. Fellers.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we have 8 yes, 10 no, and 1 absent.
Motion fails. We have not appointed Mr. Lindmark to the District 4 seat.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Is that Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you. Seeing how that motion failed, I would make a motion to appoint Michael Zintak.
No, actually, I made the appointment, sir, and he is not on the agenda. So we cannot do that. We will not be taking that action this evening. With that, we've done our 2 items of business. Any board member correspondence? Mr. Kelly.
Motion to overrule the ruling of the chair.
Point of order, can't be overruled. Point of order.
Mr. Kelly, I could not hear you. I apologize.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman?
I'm trying to give Mr. Kelly the floor, then I'm gonna come right back to you, Mr. Webster.
Thank you.
Yep. Mr. Kelly.
Yes, I made a motion to overrule the chair.
So there's a motion.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. This can't be overruled because it's in our rules that the chairman makes the appointment, and it can't be done via a motion. You can't overrule our ordinances.
I'm going to go to Mr. Kurlenkus on that. I tend to think you're right, but I'll go to Mr. Kurlenkus. I did not plan. There is not an action item on here. Mr. Kurlenkus. Marilyn, are you there?
Where's your lawyer when you need him?
You don't want an answer to that. Oh, I see Sarah is with us. We have another lawyer.
I'm not doing this. Mr. Kurlenkus is doing this. I'm waiting for economic development.
Oh, you're just a casual observer. So,
Right.
so here's the concern I have with the rules as they
You're not
stand.
waiting for anything from me, are you?
Well played, Sarah.
There. Mr. Kurlenkus.
Hello?
Hello,
Yeah, Mr. Marilyn or Dave?
it's Dave on. I'm sorry, I was muted and I couldn't get off. Is Dave on?
He was, and now he's back off. So the question, we have an attempt after we shot down Brad Lindmark, who was on the agenda as the recommended appointment by myself. He was not approved by the board. There was an attempt to make a motion of a person who's not on the agenda and by somebody other than the chairman. I don't see how we can get there from here. And that was not going to be my next action as chairman, all due respect to my friend, Mr. Kelly. So I think that's not something we can do.
That's correct. That's my understanding.
Okay. So we will not do that. We cannot take that action. With that, we would go to.
Hello?
Oh, Mr.
Hello?
I apologize. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'm still here, and thank you. The reason I said that, Mr. Chairman, and everyone on the board there, is because I reflected back to the appointment there of our current State's Attorney, Marilyn Height Ross. And so what happened there was your first name that you chose there was shot down. And so then Marilyn Height Ross, her name wasn't on the agenda either, I don't believe, but then her name was brought forward and then we voted for her. So I just following suit, I thought that was the appropriate thing to do when I made this motion to appoint Mike Zintak after Mr. Lindmark failed.
Chairman?
Yeah, thank you. So the difference here,
I'd like me to
Mr.
address that.
Hold on one second. So the difference here is
Yes.
two. Number one,
Yes.
that there was appointment, how it was listed on the agenda is different and my intentions are different. How it was listed on the agenda for this evening was the appointment of Brad Lindmark to District 4 seat. It did not say appointment of District 4 candidate. That's one notable difference. Number two is in the case of the state's attorney, I brought forward that appointment. and I entertained a motion. There was a motion, a second, and then an approval. So on both cases, those are different from this instance. So it would not be something that we can do at this time.
Okay, so can I have a follow-up, please?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so then would it be appropriate for me then to make a motion to put Michael Zintak's name on for an appointment at our next regularly scheduled county board meeting? That would be my motion.
No, it would not, because as chairman, I make the appointment.
So are you telling me you have no intention of appointing Mr. Zintak?
I will be speaking to the Republican caucus chair after this meeting. I do not know what the immediate next step would be. I have my suspicions, but I will speak to Mr. McDonald out of respect for the position of the caucus, which is something I've been asked to do. I have given a lot of room in this process to the caucus, to the board, to former board members, and I actually believe the former chairman, ironically. So I will look to more fully engage, and we'll be making an appointment in the very near future with a lot of input from the Republican caucus chair, which will be my direct go-to on this.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. No, I appreciate the conversation. So we're clear on where we're at, where we're going. And with that, then I believe we can transition to board member correspondence. I know we had a couple. We may have a couple more. Is there any board member correspondence, board member comments before we adjourn? Yes, Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, timeline, when you think we might be able to meet again in person, practicing masks, social distancing, all that stuff. I mean, do you see that happening in the foreseeable future? I know this has worked out for now, but it's a little, I just think it's easier to communicate in person.
I'm open. Here's my preference is we are technically legally essential. If the General Assembly can meet in a big auditorium, then maybe we can as well. However, given where we're at, what I would like to do is get through the next board meeting as is, but at some point in June, transition back. I think that it may be more appropriate to transition committees, which are smaller in nature, like on the third floor with plenty of space, and then transition and do the board thing, because we're going to have to rearrange in the boardroom, and it's going to be actually more difficult to either all be separate. It's easier to be all together or all separate. Where it gets hard for Gus is when we got 50-50. Because then people can't see each other. It's hard for comments to be heard. So what I would say is I'm open to feedback from the board. My preference is next Thursday, we have a Zoom board meeting, but maybe what we look to do is have another week, since we're in phase 2 next week anyway, look to transition committee first, early June, and then look to transition board that next one after that maybe. But we're coming, it's coming. But what we need to do is probably talk about, if 2 people sit next to each other in the boardroom, that's not going to fly. We're going to have to space folks up, which I think is we can do it, but it's going to take a little bit of work. Whereas with committees in early June, I think you all could get together in a committee in 303 and have plenty of space and do it safely and appropriately, easier than a full board meeting right now. Is that, go ahead, Mr. on a follow-up?
Just to follow up, I guess, I would prefer to, at some point, if we could meet in person, but I also want to say that I respect, all of my colleagues' opinion on this. And if we're not unanimous in feeling comfortable meeting in person, then I'm fully on board with us continuing this until everyone is comfortable. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Webster.
Thank you. I think this will be my last time. I'd like to suggest there that perhaps we could meet at Memorial Hall. That's a county-owned building, very large for the number of people that we would be meeting. And so I think we can stretch out there. There's plenty of room there. There's microphones available. We don't have to be anywhere near one another. And it would be good to see everyone again. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
It'd be great to see you as well, Mr. Webster. I think that's a great idea. Let me poke around on that. What I may ask is for a little bit of a latitude that may be a June transition, if it can be worked out. That way I don't ask maintenance and anybody else. They're pretty loaded right now, and if we can't make it happen efficiently or easily like next Thursday, then maybe we would kick it into June in terms of the full board. Mr. Feller's had his hand up. It's a good idea. I like it a lot, Mr. Webster. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you. Can I add on?
Yeah, go ahead. You still have the floor. Then I'll go to Mr. Fellers.
Yeah, and it's not just for us at our board meetings. I mean, sometimes we have a gallery full of people, but not that often. But when it comes to this zoning issues there, we've got everything on hold there because generally speaking, for zoning, if there's anything even partially controversial, you wind up with a number of petitioners and a number of objectors. And so, therefore, if we could meet at a much larger facility, we could accommodate everyone there, because right now, if we go to a committee meeting, you have 7 committee members, you have 2 staff members, and a state's attorney, assistant state's attorney, Holy is always there as well. So you're already up to 10 right there. And then you get some petitioners, some objectors there. Good Lord, who knows how many you'll have then. So that's why I would appreciate it if we could move the county forward there, because we do have people waiting in the wings for applying for some zoning applications and so forth. And I hate to put a wrench in their projects as well. So that's just another thing that's being held up by this damn virus. Thank you.
Well, we certainly don't want to hold up business getting done at the county. So I'm going to send an email before I get off my computer here, right when we're done, just putting that on Steve Chapman's radar, Sean Franks. I think that's a fair point. And as soon as we can, I guess, work it in responsibly into the process, I do agree with Mr. Webster's points. Any other comments under board member correspondence? Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on this, I literally do 5 to 7 of these Zoom meetings every day, and I'll pass this along. I understand that this is challenging for some. It makes it much easier if everyone is, number one, on their laptop. The county has given us all a laptop to use. And if you're on your phone, if you're on an iPad, it's going to be much more difficult to get this done. Number two, if you don't have a good internet connection at home, we should make arrangements then to go into one of the county board offices, whether on the 8th floor or whether in the county building itself, where you can get a stable connection. I applaud the chairman for his effort on this, but trying to run a meeting of 20 people with as many as 5 are on a phone, you can't see them. They have to constantly interrupt discussion because they can't raise their hand. It makes this very long and very difficult to do. So for the near term, while we're on this, I would ask that we find a way for those that can't get a good internet connection to be able to come into a county office building at some point so that they can dial in and still maintain their social distancing.
Yeah. Mr. Westcott was having an issue. He came in at the last board meeting and did just that. Mr. McDonald has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess it's not so much for new business, but I'm curious if Mr. Kelly is smoking. And I hope he's not smoking marijuana during the board meeting. I'm not making allegations, but what he had versus the smoke. I just want to make sure we're very clear with the public that we're on the up and up and good things are happening.
Okay. So with that, is there any other comments by board members? Mr. Fiducia.
Motion to adjourn, Chairman.
We got a motion to adjourn by Mr. Fiducia. May I please? Second, Mr. Girl. Anybody opposed to adjourning? Have a great evening, everybody. Be safe.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
This is Gus. We're staying live for the zoning committee.
Yes.
That was economic development.
I'm sorry, economic development.
Oh,
My
thank
bad.
you.
My bad.
So I'm anticipating just a brief discussion tonight. So I didn't know that this was going to take this long. So I want to go ahead and give everyone a 5-6 minute break, go use the bathroom if they need to. I myself, I'm going to go run to use the bathroom real quick. So if you guys could just bear with us, and we'll be right back on in about 3-4 minutes or 4 or 5 minutes tops. Okay.
Thanks.
Hey, Chris, you there?
Yep, I'm here, Jazz.
I believe we got a couple of minutes to get Paul back on, and I think we should have a quorum as long as Tim stays on.
Yeah, I'm seeing that we have 7 members. Dan Fellers and Fred Westcott appear to be absent.
Yes. Is everyone else kind of ready? All right. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually, sorry. We'll go ahead and we'll get the meeting of the Economic Development Committee on Wednesday, May 20th, and call that to order. I'll begin with doing roll call, and I'll go individually through here. Dorothy Red.
Present.
Paul Arena.
Here.
John Butita.
Here.
Gene Crosby.
Here.
Dan Fellers is absent. Bert Girl.
Here.
And Tim Neighbors.
Here.
And Fred Westcott is also absent. We do have a quorum. Today, moving on to the next thing, I am looking for a motion for the approval of minutes for the April 14th, 2020 Economic Development Committee meeting. Can I have a motion?
So move.
I got a motion by Ms. Crosby, a second. By Mr. Arena. All those anybody opposed? With that, we'll go ahead and approve that. Moving on to public comment, as we do not have any, we'll move past that portion as well, and we'll move on to the host fee discussions. On the host fee, under host fee discussions, and I'll just open the floor up real quick here right after a little spiel. So what I wanted to actually discuss was, I was thinking about what are we going to do moving on forward from here. I did want to actually get some feedback from the committee. One of the things that we've had is I've had different members mentioning different things during county board meetings, especially during board member correspondence. I did want to discuss the fact that we still are going to be looking at, and actually at the next meeting that we're going to have, which will probably be scheduled for next week, we will be looking at the annual host fee gives that we typically give. And those actually, I believe, are a little bit lower. That's the annual commitments, which I'll be emailing out to you tonight. From that, I'll let you guys look it over, and that is the whole annual host fee commitments that we've been doing over the years now, and we always approve those in a lump sum. That is actually only $455,000. It's actually smaller than the ones that we did last time. We did have an open board as far as doing more host fee commitments last time to non-for-profits and everything else, which we included on our annual host fee gives. This time it's just the main annual host fee gives that we've always they're under our annual host fee gives, but we've approved them every year. And that would include stuff like the U of I extension, Winnebago County water system expenses, and Chris can get more of a synopsis on each one of those, just a brief, synopsis on what that's about. These are typically things that we've been a part of over the years, so we're going to be looking at that next time. What I do want to talk about tonight, though, mainly is actually what the board members' opinions are on future host fee gives and what we're looking at and what we want to do. Right now, as it sits, with multiple communications with Chris, and he can go ahead and fill in more detail here in a minute. As far as the host fee funds that come in every year, we are looking at basically maintaining regular trajectory. We're not really going to be seeing a big dip or anything like that. If we do see a dip, it'll be a small dip. Not one that would be very greatly noticed, but at the same time, we still don't know for sure. As with anything during this shutdown, I mean, we can only project what we're looking at. For the most part, though, the landfill has been operating consistently and regularly as it should. Other than that, I also wanted to mention the fact that with that, our budget for the year, if you guys remember last year, we actually set ourselves a cap. That I do believe is going to be ending here this month. And what that is, what I mean by cap is actually on the annual host fees. We actually had a motion. We actually voted in a resolution to put a moratorium on long-term host fee commitments or new long-term host fee commitments for a year, and that's going to be ending as well. We also have a cap that we put on the annual host fees, which I believe was just over $1 million. Chris, do you remember off the top of your head which one that was?
I don't, Mr. Chairman, on the $1 million cap. I don't recall that.
So
and I believe actually the moratorium expired. I'm looking at trying to find it right now. I think it was April 17th, the moratorium that was put on last year for multi-year ones.
Okay. So for us right now, what we're at is that we have that cap that existed. That's also fell off as well. With that moratorium ending and with that cap falling off, what I did want to mention also is actually, if we look at the numbers of what we did last year and what we're doing right now, we have not even hit near the amount of annual host fee funds that we've given out compared to last year. We're nowhere near, I mean, we haven't added any long-term host fee commitments. The only host fee commitment that we did that was a business one, not an annual one per se, was a one-time gift for S-Wing that we approved. But I do believe that fell under our previous budget, our previous host fee budget. So right now we, at this point, have not spent any extra business dollars for the year. Actually, we have, I do apologize. We did give the $250,000 to be a part of the, not a grant, the loan program with the city. So I do want to make sure I mention that. So aside from that, we haven't had any other expenditures, but that's why now we're actually, basically I can talk to you guys in regards to what are we going to do in the future, because now we'll know and we'll attack that, and I'll know what to look for out of the rest of the host fee ask for the year. So if anybody has any input on that right now in the moment, I'd like to open up the floor to that. But first, let me have, actually, Chris Dorbush already updated us on when that ended as far as the moratorium goes. So go ahead, I'll actually open it up to the floor. If Chris,
Mr. Chairman, I just found it. I stand corrected. It was April 11th. It expired, not April 17th, for the moratorium, which also had the $1 million cap that you referenced. Thanks.
All right. Chris, is there anything you wanted to add in on that? What I had talked.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Billich, Chairman Haney, Steve Chapman, and myself sat down. I believe it was January, maybe early into February, trying to go through some of the annual host fees that are typical year-to-year gives with the same organizations. We were working on that, and then some of the things have already come through, just a single give. I believe RAMP might have been originally on that list, and they came through as a separate give. It's slipping my mind, but we did a small amount for Mary Cassiope for her organization as well. And so there's been a few that were on the kind of the to-do list, but those have come through separately. But we've kind of broke it down and working with the administrator and the chairmans and so forth with the time. Some of the, they're trying to get the annuals and trying to get at least the base ones down. There's, and from the organizations that have been requesting and inquiring about them. It's not that we can't go and do additional funds, later on, but we're trying to do the group that everyone seems to typically agree on with the match that will be coming up. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dornbush. Anyone have any other comments that they'd like to make tonight? Mr. Arena, I'll go with you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just think, I know that the host fees have been considered as earmarked for economic development. In light of the virus and our financial situation, I don't think we should make any definitive decisions on distributing that money until we assess our complete financial picture, when we're going to get reimbursement for the money we've already spent, in response to the virus. Maybe just hang on to the money as long as we can, so we really have a full understanding of where we're going to be at financially. And then also, Mr. Billich, I don't know, do we know how much revenue to expect from the marijuana tax? Do we have some projections on that that might also help fill some of these gaps?
Actually, in regards to that, I'll probably pass it on to Chris on that one. However, last we spoke about it, as with what Maryland had also said as well, because the way that the state had been changing the laws, they actually made it to where they weren't requiring these certain amounts of money to be pulled in together or even earmarking it for the communities until June. So we're actually expecting those numbers. Well, as far as I understand it, we're expecting those numbers in June. Maybe there has been some information, so I'll pass it on to Chris Dornbush to fill us in on that if he does have any more information. Since this coronavirus thing, we haven't really looked at that per se, but that is new revenue that we are anticipating that we're going to be getting into the county, and I just don't know exactly what that amount is as of yet. Mr. Dornbush, would you like to expand on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have not heard any updated items with numbers. Just that the reimbursement for the tax collection, I don't know with current times how that will be, but from what they were stating prior, about a 3-month, so 90 days before it would. So if we start collecting in July, which is when we're scheduled to, then we wouldn't start to receive those funds till 90 days after it. So it would essentially be October 1 if my calculation serves me right.
But we don't have a projection of what that amount would be yet, based on sales?
I have not gotten any numbers on that yet. I know State's Attorney Marilyn Hyatt Ross, I think, had some idea with it, but it's kind of complicated due to the THC level and what's going out, and I'm not sure how the COVID thing will play into it with regards with opening up, how that phase will, because it's just for recreational, it's not for medical, and my understanding is medical has been able to continue to do that, to disperse that product, but I'm not sure if the numbers will decrease or increase or what. So.
Yeah, and in regards to that, one of the issues that we were having, Mr. Arena, was also the fact that we're actually going to be dependent on seeing the other communities that passed their resolutions earlier on and made it within that first block that they had set aside. We can base the numbers off of them, but we don't have any other reports of that yet. So as far as I know.
Okay, well then, if that's not factoring in the picture, my opinion on the host fees is that we should hang on to as much money as we can until we have a full understanding of our financial situation.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. I'm going to go ahead to Mr. Butita.
Okay, yeah, I completely agree with Mr. Arena that there's no sense in us discussing any expenditures until we get a full financial understanding of what our revenue losses are and our new budget. So that pretty much takes us through the summer and into the fall. So I don't see us making any decisions or approving any other expenditures out of our fund. And the other thing I got to mention is that, and I see Steve Chapman's not with us tonight, but his last time he addressed us, that the funds, the host fee funds, are just thrown into the general fund. So we think we got a lot of cash, but I'm wondering if not, and we need to ask him this question, if this excess is just what our reserve is that funding what our reserve is? So I'd like to understand that better, and probably going to reach out to him on that.
Thank you, Mr. Butita. I think that would be a great idea to reach out to him on that regard. Last time we did speak, like you said as well, from the understanding that we both got, and the fact of the matter is anything that we have not used from the host fee funds, what's delegated as host fee fund money, anything we have not used from the host fee funds, automatically, because the host fees get turned into our actual general fund. So whatever's not used by the host fees, if anything fell off as far as money that we gave annually in the annual, or if there were long-term give and that fell off, or maybe we didn't use it, maybe we didn't approve all the money to be handed out that year, whatever's left over from that year gets put in our general fund and gets used to cover our general fund expenses. So one thing that we have seen over the years now is that even last year when we had the most amount of gives in, I guess, recent times, we had quite a bit of annual ones because we opened it up to the public. Aside from that, we did actually end up still having some monies that ended up going to our general fund, which actually helped us with our budget in that regard. As far as what I understand it, what we normally do as far as the monies that come in from the host fees is just a little over 4 million. And majority of that has already been divvied up to long-term gives. So I don't know exactly what the amounts are. I can go off of our previous last year's report that we got, but I don't have one that's up to date and current on this year as well. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to Mrs. Red on next.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Mr. Arena. We need to watch our finances. We also need to, and I don't know how this pandemic is going to affect us, but affect the community agencies, because we have given money to those agencies in the past, but right now it looks like they're not open, and we don't know what's going to happen with them. But we need to keep them in mind before we throw everything into the general fund. I don't, if they come and ask for money and things are open back up, maybe we can help them. That's my comment.
And Mrs. Red, if I actually can go ahead and say applaud you on that, because there are organizations like the Severson Dells, which we helped out with, and especially actually Keep Northern Illinois Beautiful. They've been in full contact with me. I do have all of these small groups that are going to be sending in emails. I already have one from Keep Northern Illinois Beautiful, which I'm planning on sending out to you guys before our next meeting. And in regards to that, it shows the value of our help that we've given them. Keep Northern Illinois Beautiful during this shutdown has actually operated. They have actually taken in recyclables. They still did have their drive, their big clothing drive that they do annually. They were able to make that happen. But they had to follow strict social distancing rules. And no matter how strict of rules they had to follow, they still try to operate as much as possible. Obviously, these guys operate on a shoestring budget. And they were trying to actually, before this shutdown, they were trying to actually expand into the Loves Park area and helping out the entire, making more available places for recyclables for people and to take that in and actually benefit the community in that regard. They do actually help us out, because if they don't do it for us, then we would actually have to form our own department. So we're actually seeing a cost savings by having them and by the money that we give them every year. So thank you for mentioning that one. I did forget to mention that one. Thank you, Ms. Red. I'm going to move on to Mr. Fowlers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I was late to this one. One quick question. I think I heard you mention that money that was left over at the end of the year not spent automatically goes to the general fund. Is that what you said?
Correct, Mr. Fowlers. I was shocked just as much as you. I did not actually know how the reserve would be. I mean, if you could even call it a reserve, it's not technically a reserve. I was always wondering in that regard, because I did see when I looked over the financials of what we use from the host fees over the years, I don't think I've seen a single year where we actually overspent our host fees. It's always been underspent. And I was actually always confused and wondering where the rest of that would have gone. From what I've been told so far between Steve Chapman and Chairman Haney, is that whatever those unused funds are, they've always gone towards our general fund and helping our general fund.
I bring that up because that seems like from an accounting standpoint, we would need to pass a budget amendment to move monies from one fund to another, right? I mean, they all go to the same bank account, right? But there would be line items in a spreadsheet that account the total value of each. And again, I've only been here 3 years, but I don't remember ever passing a budget amendment transferring funds out of the host fee unless it's written that way in our ordinance, right? I think maybe you double check that.
I can double check that for you, Mr. Fowlers. You bring up a good point, because I can double check that for you. But from when I asked a similar question, the way it was explained to me was it's always gone the way that it was set up was it's always gone into the general funds. They just earmark them as host fee funds. So that money is still technically general fund money. So if we didn't use all of it, it would stay there.
Yeah, no, I mean, every time we move host fee money around, there has to be a budget amendment associated with it. You can't just say this money is all of a sudden, if it's coming out of one line item, one column, it's got to go through another one. There's got to be documentation of how it gets there. So, I mean, we should really double check on that one, because we might be in violation of a few accounting rules if that's what's happening.
In that
There's
regard,
a lot.
I would actually say between Chris and Sarah, if they can look into that one. My understanding, it's like any department spending, because the departments are under the general fund. If the department doesn't spend all the money that they would have associated to their department, it's just the savings that just gets put back in the general fund. That was my understanding behind it. Maybe I'm wrong. I would actually like to pass that on to the state's attorney's office and Mr. Dornbush to get us update on that. If they know now, awesome. If not, then for the next meeting.
I have to ask an accountant.
Mr. Chairman.
Let me actually, Sarah, did you want to expound on that?
No, I just said I'd have to ask an accountant like Steve Chapman.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna go on to Ms. Red, and then I believe Mr. Butita had his hand, or Mr. Butita had his hand.
Thank you, Chairman. That was my first time hearing that. I didn't think the money was passed on to the general fund to use as they please.
Yeah.
So we need to check that out. I don't think that sounds right.
And I will look into that. Like I said, over the years, and it seemed weird to me, actually. I was more confused because many people bring up this issue of we don't want to spend our host fee funds, take care of ourselves first. So it seems that we've actually been always taking care of ourselves. It's been a matter of the fact that now we don't have a host fee reserves fund that we built up over the years. So that's why I just wanted to make that clarification on the floor, because I did ask that question. So I'll look into it some more if that's what we'd like. Mr. Kelly, go ahead. I know you're not on our committee, but you go ahead, buddy.
Thank you, Chairman. In the budget book, there has always been a host fee balance, and it's usually been somewhere around $3.5 million. And I beg to differ with your opinion. I don't think it goes to the general fund.
I don't either.
And I can ask again. That was one of the questions that I posed back in January and February, and that's the way I understood it. Maybe I'm wrong. Chris, can you add to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can look into that. What I think is the host fee dollars aren't necessarily mandated by state requirements, where certain fees that are collected. MFT funds, things like that, are earmarked for very specific things and cannot be used. So I think a lot of the revenue that just comes in general, for example, our office, our permitting and licensing revenue that comes in, it does not go to a line item that says like regional planning per se. It goes into the general fund, but they're I believe sub-itemized. So it'll say the revenue that came in from like our office or from host fees. So while I believe it's in the general fund, they're sub-itemized to indicate kind of where they are. So you don't have 50,000 accounts. You have like one account is the general fund, but the general fund accounts for a lot of things, and you put where the source is, I believe. But I can look into that.
Yep.
So
Thank you,
just
Mr.
accounting.
Thank you, Mr. Dornbush. We'll look into it. Mr. Butita, I apologize for keeping you holding for so long.
No, I the same question as everybody else. So I think if we can get those answered, general fund, is there a reserve? But overall, I would say I would like to see a hold on any expenditures out of this fund for next probably 6 months. I would say I would be in favor of that.
And thank you, Mr. Butita. I do want to reverberate to all of our committee members. As we talked about over many months, and actually from the beginning of when I was on this committee, and Mr. Arena brought it up back then, and I brought it up, was the fact that we wanted to make sure that we watched where every kind of dollar went, but also to not overdo it, because we were pushing the limit last year with how much we did spend from host fees. We still were under the budgeted amount of host fees expenditures, to my knowledge. So that we were just up there as far as the expenditures go, but that just goes to show that we've obviously been watching our pocketbooks a lot more lately, and I appreciate that from all the board members. I do want to also make sure that we also give a heads up in regards to when I got on economic development, one of the biggest things that a lot of people discussed with me was how we use our host fee monies. One thing I want to remind everyone is this is an investment tool that we have that we've been so nice to give back to the community. We've had a lot of community members come to us and tell us why and how it's helped them. At this stage, we're seeing that more than ever. I am getting emails from all the groups also that are still yet to be approved on with our annual host fee gives, and they're even letting us know in regards to how much it benefits them. One of the biggest things is that our surrounding communities have a different ways of enticing businesses. This is one of those tools that the county itself has always had as a tool to entice businesses without having to cut their taxes. So we can look at it different ways. I've also made sure that everyone's been kind of, when they come to ask us for host fee money, instead of just only asking us for host fee money, to actually ask for less on the money side and more on the giving them a tax break or something like that. We've developed different tax break levels as well that I've been working on with Chris Dornbush. We are still going to be looking at another tax break that was included with the city, which that would be like a municipal partnership between Rockford and us. And I believe actually Loves Park also wanted to do it as well, and McChesney Park. So we're giving the other benefits and trying to push for those. But at the same time, I just want to remind everyone, this is a way that we can actually boost our economic value here in our community, in our county. One of the biggest things that everybody discussed last time when we had a controversial vote, I don't mean to bring it up, but Costco, one of the biggest controversial votes, and everyone's seen the amount of traffic they do. And if I can actually have Chris can probably give us the numbers on that, or at least kind of like an insight on that, on how much they paid as far as sales taxes go. And one thing that we can make and capitalize on as a community, as a county, to help our smaller community members is to capitalize on the sales tax that we have, especially for the people that are coming in from out of town, that are passing through Rockford, that are stopping at our gas stations, our businesses, our stores, people from outside our county that are coming here for our stores and for spending their hard-earned cash. So I do want to remind the committee members on that. You can look at it whichever way you want, but don't rule out the investment side of it. Right now, we have an opportunity to also use these funds in regards to helping our community. I'd rather go that route. I know it was hard for a lot of people to swallow that loan. I was actually kind of shocked that it turns out that loan was held by SBC or the SBA loans. So there's actually a lot of people in our community right now that are hurting. A lot of businesses that come to me that ask me about it because they're hurting, and some that haven't been able to get approved by the SBA and therefore do not even qualify for our loan program. And they're looking to us as community leaders to make sure that we can help all the businesses out in some way, shape, or form, especially our local ones, especially our small businesses, especially the backbone of America, as everyone knows that they are. So I want that to keep in mind. Other than that, if I don't have any more, do I have anybody else that wanted to say something? Mr. Neighbors, you have a hand up? Go ahead, Mr. Neighbors.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, along with not using our host fees as we normally did we find ways to invest so we can increase our host fees for the future or keep it sustainable?
So in regards to that, I'll answer that by saying that's why we took that proactive method of having the host fees, as far as long-term host fees, are now qualified as basically quantified as a loan that they will have to be paid back. It is still technically individually taken. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to vote on it if we approve that give, and if we approve, at the rate that we have it set at right now for long-term fee or long-term approvals. So in regards to that, we have looked at it that way. As far as you're talking about investments, as far as putting it in some kind of fund that could grow or something like that, is that what you're talking about referencing?
Yes.
In regards to that, when I asked a little bit about it, it seems that nobody really had a succinct plan in that kind of regard. One thing that we have to follow is also the legalities behind that. I will bring it up again to look into that a bit more, especially with people, especially with Steve, because he'd probably know more of the answers on the legalities and everything in that kind of regard. So, and the state's attorney's office as well, Sarah. I'll reach out to you about that one as well. But that's definitely, I can look back into that. That's a good suggestion. Thank you, Mr. Neighbors. I did see Mrs. Red, you also had a hand up.
I think
Yeah, you answered the question for me.
In
Oh,
regards,
one other question, I'm sorry.
go ahead, Ms. Red.
Now, we have the small businesses that are going out of business or losing their businesses. Where do they go exactly to try and apply for this loan? Did you send us an application, or where do they get the application?
Correct, Ms. Red, actually. So they would actually reach out to our economic development offices, either to Chris Dornbush. Some people have reached out to county board members. I know you actually personally have helped some of these businesses and small not-for-profits as well. You've presented them to the chairman, and he's kind of delegated how that worked out. I don't know particularly other than Chris. Chris, could you expound on that? I believe they usually do reach out to you or the chairman or to county board member, and they refer it back to you. Am I correct?
Right now, I'm talking about the ones that are in business because of the pandemic.
Correct.
Where do they get that application for the loan?
Oh, Mr. Dornbush, would you care to answer that one?
Ms. Red, are you referring to the money that the county had approved to go to RLDC? Yes. RLDC, so John Phelps with Rockford Local Development Corporation.
Okay.
Reach out to him for an application to apply to that, similar to like the revolving loan funds.
Okay, you don't have one that you can send to the board members or send to me, and I can share it with this small business that's losing his business?
I can reach out to John Phelps and see if he can give me an application, and then I can forward it on to you.
Okay, that's fine. But you don't have to. I can do that. I can do that.
I'm sorry about that, Ms. Red. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I apologize.
I'm sorry. I can contact John tomorrow.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions or concerns? All right. With that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Mr. Arena, second by Ms. Red. Anybody opposed? Thank you guys so much. Be listening for the next meeting. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jess.